Okay, I think we're ready to get started and call together our work session. Welcome to our guests and to our state legislators that are here with us tonight. We have Representative Ray Ward and Representative Melissa Garf-Ballard that are here to give us a legislative update. For those that aren't familiar, our legislative session starts next week on Tuesday. It will run for 45 calendar days, 33 super fun working days. And our legislators will be working throughout that entire time period on state budget and state policy. And so this is our opportunity to hear from each of them about their priorities and the issues that they see coming up, and then ask them any questions and let them know of any priorities we have. So, Gary, did you have anything you wanted to lead out with in terms of legislative update, or should we ask our legislators to come in and join us first?
I'd love the opportunity to maybe just talk about some of the property tax initiatives in particular that we're hearing about, but we can wait until after you've told us what's on your mind, if that's okay, Mayor and representatives.
Does that work? Would you two like to paper, rock, scissors, or come to the podium at the same time to tell us about what you see on your radar and any priorities you have?
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Melissa Garf-Ballard, and I represent the south side of Bountiful and North Salt Lake and Woods Cross. I grew up on Valverda, at the top of Valverda on Indian Springs Road, so this is my home. And we have raised our six kids in North Salt Lake, so Davis County and this area has always been such an important part for me in my life. So looking forward to this legislative session, what we never know is how some of our colleagues' bills are going to come forward, which ones are not even going to see the light of day, and which ones are going to be a hot topic or button. And so what I do know is a few things. I'm going to start first with some of our legislative priorities as a majority caucus. So in the House of Representatives, we have a supermajority of mostly Republicans, but we have a caucus, and there's lots of different opinions within that caucus, but we have determined a handful of priorities that we would like to make sure we address this legislative session. One of them is cost of living, and that does include addressing property taxes or cutting taxes, lowering gas prices, keeping home ownership within reach. We also want to have policy that supports strong families and also protecting children. I personally will have a couple of pieces of legislation in both of these categories. One of them with the strong families and protecting children. I sit on law enforcement, criminal justice, and so I have a couple of bills that really continue to support predators from taking advantage of minors. In today's digital world, it's becoming more prevalent, and so I have a couple bills relating to that. It's challenging when we hear in the Law Enforcement Criminal Justice Committee how Utah is the crossroads of the West, including for easy human and sex trafficking as well as for drug trafficking. So there's a tremendous amount of work on public safety to keep Utah safe. That's another one of our priorities, as well as addressing homelessness. For education, we have goals for achieving academic excellence and reducing classroom disruptions and better returns on learning for higher education. We've done a lot of rebuilding and reconstructing how higher ed is done, but we are also in the top of the nation for most affordable higher ed, and that includes tech colleges in the nation. We also have priorities for water, tackling infrastructure and insufficient water supply. Also protecting and restoring the Great Salt Lake, and there's been a number of public-private partnerships to really bring more water into the Great Salt Lake, which affects all of us with our air quality, for sure. So those are, we also have two other categories. One of them is limited government. cutting government spending and mitigating federal uncertainty. I am actually really was thrilled to receive the governor's first Grit Award. He created his own version of Doge, and he created Government Resilience and Innovation and Transparency Award, and I received the very first one, whereas everyone else are government employees in their agencies, and that was because of my consistency almost nearly every year of having legislation that provides more government transparency and innovation and efficiency, and for example, producing and requiring agencies to have performance measures and accountability, making plans for what to do with their non-lapsing funds and so forth. So that was a great honor to be chosen by the governor to have that very first award. And then we also have the priority of infrastructure, of powering the future, securing critical minerals, and also reducing traffic. We actually in Utah do have 50 of the 60 crucial minerals that we have right here, and we need to make sure that we have access to those and being able to promote our economy and also self-reliance, not just in our state, but also throughout our country. So we have a lot of opportunities for those. There will always be hot topics. I think the three categories of bills that I'm running this session, one of them is regarding taxes, is to actually reduce the marriage penalty within our tax code. We have a real challenge when the federal government, one of their 76 welfare programs, really encourage people not to work or encourage them to be reliant on the government and not get married. There'll be oftentimes two people in the same household, with one that gets the head of household status and earning their income, and the other one claiming all the many welfare programs. And so when they do decide to get married, we want to help reduce that cliff to not be quite so steep, because we want, especially the lower income, where those few $1,000s will make such a difference and impact on their decision to have a strong family. We do know that Utah has invested in the success sequence, and also in working in teaching our children in our K through 12 schools. That success sequence has a proven rate of helping individuals to have a 95% chance of not being in poverty if they follow the success sequence, which is to graduate from high school, have a full-time job, and be married before having a child. And so in promoting that for our youth to understand, if they really want to have a better chance of not being in poverty, to consider that, I think is a tremendous thing for us as taxpayers and as neighbors and as friends, to help people to be more self-sufficient and also to have a strong family base. And that's really what has made America great, is our great families and our communities. I also I sit on the Business and Labor Committee, and we're working on reducing regulation across many industries, making it easier for people to work and be effective with less cost to their profession or certification. In the committee, I had to pull out the provisions in this big omnibus bill for many certifications and licensure, specifically for speech-language pathologists and also for hearing aid specialists. So it's probably pretty consistent with what I prefer to do as a member of the Utah House of Representatives, which is really bring together the experts in the community to say what is important for your industry, what are challenges, and then being able to work with government agencies really to find a more productive and supported policy moving forward. It's not that the DOPL didn't do that, they just didn't reach out to all the entities, and that one in particular had some very specific issues. And being one who wears a hearing aid and whose kids benefited from speech, language, and learning how to say their R's, I'm a great proponent for what the industry does. And so I'm the end user in a lot of different bills, and especially interesting being the only female Republican on the Business and Labor Committee, just because there's so many industries that are relative to different genders and different focuses, and having such a strong background in business, I think that's a great committee for me to continue to serve on and be in. I'm also in leadership for our Law Enforcement Criminal Justice Appropriations Committee. So the last few years I've done a lot for reentry for our inmates, so that there is more of a plan, preparation, an opportunity for them while they are incarcerated to actually start making more substantial changes before they become our neighbors and friends. 90% of those who are incarcerated rely on successful parole. So I told AP&P at one of our last meetings, I said, so you're telling me the parole better be 90% awesome, right? And they were like, well, what did you want us to measure? And I'm like, okay, we got to work on that. So they do return to our communities, and so having more accountability really helps prevent homelessness, prevents recidivism, which is a huge cost to taxpayers. So we have this really interesting balance of increasing penalties for those that particularly have crimes against children, and a balance of what space we have in our prisons. But I think public safety is a crucial component. So oftentimes when I knock on doors and say, what are you most concerned about? If their public safety is a great concern, that is number one of what they address. If they feel safe in their homes and in their neighborhoods, that doesn't even come up. So that means that you're doing what you need to do, and our law enforcement is doing what they need to do, but it takes constant vigilance. So that's a little bit about some things that I'm working on personally, and what our priorities are within our caucus. And I did hear yesterday at the Taxpayers Association conference where I did present the marriage penalty bill that I've got. I did hear that Representative Oxier is working on some of the local tax issues, and there was our County Commissioner Lorraine Kamala who brought up that it's challenging for the counties because legislation often has unfunded mandates or requires things, and so there is that balance. So I'm not sure where that bill is going to end up. But we always appreciate you reaching out and letting us know when the bill actually comes forward. There's often many changes, but when the bill actually comes forward, what we can do to help support you the most and our neighbors. So maybe, I don't know if you want to ask questions now or after Representative Ward.
How about we switch, and we'll have Representative Ward
Great.
tell us about some of his priorities, and then we can get into some of our issues. And just while you guys are transitioning, I should mention, as you're aware, we are, as a city, very active members of the League of Cities and Towns, and our legislative policy committee members that we'll be adopting later in the meeting will be myself, Councilmember Child, Councilmember Higginson, and our city manager, Gary Hill. So as we have in past years with a text string sometimes to alert you to issues, expect the same.
Always glad to get those. Those are a big help.
So,
thank you.
Representative, please tell us what's on your priority list.
Yeah, and also to say, I have a hard stop at 1:45, not that you had us for that much time on your agenda, but a couple of things. So we, the South Davis County delegation, will be having a couple of town hall meetings. On Tuesday, the 20th, Paul Cutler and I will be having a town hall at 7 p.m. up in the Centerville Library for the folks that are a little bit further north. And then on Saturday, the 24th, the first Saturday of the session from 10 to 11:30 a.m., we'll be having a town hall right here. Thank you so much for letting us reserve the room. We're looking forward to that and really appreciate the chance to use this beautiful space to have a town hall where we'll be inviting whoever we can get to come to talk about what's going on at the session. So I'd invite you, along with anybody else, please to come to that. And that will be Representative Ballard and myself and Representative Cutler and Senator Weiler will be presenting at that on Saturday. I want to take just a minute maybe and talk about what I think the big issues for the session overall are, to give that sort of a preview. Our one job is to set the budget right for the year. And so we're thinking about what that's going to be like. And it's going to be difficult. There are two things that have kind of come together to make it that I think it's going to be a fairly harsh year in that respect. One is that the economy is not horrible, but it's largely flat. It's not up, as it has been in several past years. Or if it is up, it is up a tiny, tiny amount that it's up. And that is combined with the big, beautiful bill that passed on a federal level that had explicit federal tax cuts in it, but that also changed the way that adjusted gross income is calculated. And since Utah law uses the adjusted gross income to determine how much we will collect income tax on, that also has the effect of being a Utah state tax cut from the changes that were made at a federal level. So there's that on the personal tax. And then there were also some business tax deductions that were changed. So instead of being amortized over the life of an item, will be front loaded. And so that also will be a one-time hit where individuals will be able to take the full value of that tax depreciation earlier on. The net effect of that is a $300 million tax cut to the state budget. So those two things taken together, and then together with a few things that the state has agreed to fund that we kind of agree to always fund. We have some statutory obligations to fund increases in education according to inflation, to fund Medicaid enough that the program can continue to operate, and a small commitment for a cost of living increase to some state employees. And by the time you factor in those things, that we're at zero one time and zero ongoing, kind of uncommitted. So if they're past those things, at least our expectation is that any new funding would need to be accompanied by some other cut somewhere. And in a certain sense, that by itself also will be a cut to many other programs that will rely, our other programs that aren't employees also rely on cost of living increases for the program to still function, especially many of our social service programs that Baby Watch does, and our DSPD services goes through contractors instead of employees. Many of those services will essentially get a cut equal to whatever inflation is if they don't get something else. So that'll just be the milieu. We will do the best we can to find cuts that are reasonable and can still allow the programs to function. As far as other big issues for the session, what I think writ large, it will be a very important issue to consider the balance of power between the legislature to pass laws and citizen ballot initiatives. That in particular, that issue has kind of come to the fore because of the redistricting, which by itself is a very important and very hot burning issue. And still out in play and not completely clear how that will, I think, for this congressional term, I think the map that the judge made will be the map that we use. It's not at all clear to me that it will or should be by the time our Supreme Court gets done talking about it, and there will be an effort to add 2 judges to the Supreme Court. But then just the bigger issue of if a ballot initiative passes, can the legislature, you can think of 2 extremes. One is that the legislature could never overturn it ever. It would be a super law that the legislature could never do anything. That clearly cannot be the right answer. Laws need to be able to be changed. And on the other side to say, well, the legislature could call itself into session 1 week later and overturn whatever it wanted from a ballot initiative, which would functionally eliminate ballot initiatives from ever able to be run if everybody knew that they could just be overturned that easily. So it will have to be a constitutional change, but that will be an important change, and that'll be a big part of the discussion. The other big issue that I think will come back in effect that cities will be thinking about is some changes to the many, many, many recent enlargements of tax increment districts, public infrastructure districts. Historically, we have redevelopment areas, RDAs and CDAs that cities have used to develop, and Bountiful has one here that we've used to develop. But in recent years, we have MIDA, we have the Point, and now we have the sports park and the ballpark. And on top of that, we have the inland port, which is not just one, but has the ability to generate as many as it wants to around the state, which scrape off tax money from where it was going, and then in some way give it to some other group. And maybe that was the exact right thing to allow infrastructure to be developed, but we've enlarged it in many ways. It can be used for private property now in instances if they can show that that was needed infrastructure. And each one of those has a different set of rules of who has to approve it. Some scrape off just property tax money, some can scrape off sales tax money, some scrape off transient room tax money. All that's money that would have gone to the taxing entities. So there'll be some efforts to reform that. And to me, that's a really important tax-related issue. I don't know how that will end up. The bill that I have that will most interact with the cities, I graciously had a chance to talk with Councilmember Himison and Mayor Bradshaw and Gary Hill about, is my housing bill. And I guess in back of all that, it is my feeling that the way we do zoning in general, writ large, creates a process that tends to say no, to makes it easy to say no to many projects that I believe would benefit the individual doing them, and that I believe also would benefit the community as a whole and the state as a whole if we had some process that made it more likely or easier to say yes while still retaining the city's ultimate ability to have the final say over their zoning. So my bill, to kind of speak to that belief, will take a few things that I believe will make it be easier to have small housing and more affordable housing. Two examples would be to be able to be allowed to build on a small lot. The smaller the lot, the cheaper it's going to be in the end because the land is very expensive, or to build a starter home. So a starter home would be a home that is sold to its first owner for less than the area mean home price of the county, and that is restricted to be owner occupied initially for 2 years. And then to say an individual who wished to build one of those things, either a small home or a home on a small lot, could come to the city and say, I wish to build one of these things. And without having to go through many, many thousands of dollars to submit a complete plan, but could come let the city know that they wish to build one, and that the city then would have a period of time to say, no, we don't want you to build it, and the city could always vote it down. And that could happen either at the planning commission or at a city council level for any reason that the city did not want to have it be built. But if the city voted yes, at either place, the planning commission or the city council, it would be a permitted use. They'd still have to follow all the other rules of a use, but that thing would be a permitted use. And if the city said, well, that's not important enough to really interfere with your plans, we choose to not take an action, then after a time period, it also would become a permitted use. That's my best way that I can think of to balance allowing small projects to be permitted more easily while still having a partnership with the cities that they retain the final say. I know that gets to the very heart of the way that we permit projects and don't, so I do not pretend that's a small issue, but to me, I feel it's a very important issue. So that's the bill I'll be bringing, and I'm happy to answer questions about that or anything else. I'm just thinking back to the last time I was standing up here and had you all ask me questions for an entire hour, so that's why I set my 1:45 hard stop.
That's smart, to have a backstop appointment. We've experienced that tool. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for spending the time to meet with Councilman Higginson and Gary and I to talk about that bill. I know you've spent extensive time talking with the League of Cities and Towns staff as well, and so you're aware of our concerns and kind
Yes.
of our different viewpoints there. So
Yep.
we may not need to spend as much time there since you only have so much time, and we do have a couple issues I know we want to share with you. Before we have Gary talk about a few of the property tax issues that are definitely on our radar, a couple things I wanted to make sure on your radar. Your colleague, Representative Cutler, who does have one fine Bountiful precinct that he represents, is working on a bill dealing with e-motorcycles and e-bikes that I think we're particularly interested in. It's been something that we spent a work session on with our police chief as we experienced some challenges with damage to parks, damage to trails where e-motorcycles in particular aren't allowed, a myriad of safety issues of youth without driver's licenses, driving e-motorcycles, helmets, those types of issues, fleeing police. So are really excited to see his bill. I know he's been working with the law enforcement legislative committee, and so excited to see that when he's ready to number. So please keep that on your radar that many cities are also tracking that. The second would be, energy. We've asked you in years past to be aware that Bountiful is a public power system city, and that is an important issue for us. We expect that there will be some additional legislation in that regard, about disposition of assets for public power and making sure that if cities are going to divest of those, that we get fair market value for those. And then it was suggested to me in a meeting that they didn't need to involve cities in the discussion. They would just involve the legislators that represent municipal power system cities. And so we would ask that you make sure that as those bills are coming up, that you are staying really close with us as the operators of those municipal power systems, to know what those impacts truly are and what our wishes and impacts are, since we're the only municipal power system cities in your district. So those are two I wanted to make sure you had on your radar.
If you want us to go to the bill sponsors at any point, including early on, please let us know.
We definitely will. We have appreciated that you have both been quick to check in as those issues have played out over the last couple of sessions. Richard and Beth, do you have any thoughts from Legislative Policy Committee meeting that we had yesterday that you want to share, and then maybe ask Gary to chime in on some property tax, then we can open it wide up?
Thanks, Mayor. I think one of the red flags I had yesterday, I'm assuming that Gary's going to talk about, and that's the Senate Bill 97, Dan McKay's. Okay, so I'll leave that to him, but that one's on the radar.
Anything for you, Councilman Higginson,
No.
before we turn over to Gary?
Nothing in addition to that. Thank you.
Then Gary, if you want to jump into the always fun and exciting topic of property taxes.
Yes, thanks. And we really appreciate you both being here and always being so accessible when we reach out. Thought it might be a good opportunity to share with you a little bit some of how we view property tax. It's an interesting revenue source because the state doesn't get a property tax. And so changes can be made at the state level without really considering the pretty dramatic impacts on the local level. As you probably know, property tax is the only tax revenue that we actually have any control over. Our sales tax rates are set by the state. We can't just go out and increase the sales tax rate or decrease. We could decrease it, I suppose. We don't have any ability to generate or create new taxes, and so the only one that we have the ability to actually change is property tax. And that has a couple of really big benefits for us. The first one is that in the event we have something we have to act on, I think one of the times that we've increased our property tax, one of the 2 times in the last 10 years, was to add some new police officers. We use property tax to be able to do that. Another thing that's really important is the way bonding agencies look at cities' ability to raise our revenues. It's hugely important to the rating agencies and our ability to get low interest loans, to have the ability to pledge the full faith and credit of the city towards repaying our debts. And one of the reasons we have the ability to do that is because we essentially have an unlimited ability currently within the confines of a pretty high cap and the truth in taxation laws to assess property tax. One of the bills that concerns us, and it's not Senator McKay's, we'll talk about that one in a minute, is an effort that would cap a city's property tax increase to 5%. Any taxing entities, not just cities.
And that's Representative Auxierre's bill.
I think, yeah, that's, and I can't remember the number. It's like 121, 161.
I believe Senator McKay's has the cap. It's Representative Auxierre's that is the Colorado taper style.
Okay. So,
And then Representative Coford has the shift in the residential, commercial, primary residential exemption.
so we'll talk through the concepts on each of those a little bit really briefly, if you don't mind. But let's start with, if we can, we'll start with the challenges with the cap. And you can probably already see why that might be a concern to us in the event that we have to take action in some way. Right now, we have the ability to do that. If there's a 5% maximum cap on what we could increase, it really reduces our ability. And I think the practical effect of that is you're going to see a lot more tax increases. that cities, as a precaution, and not just cities, that all taxing entities as a precaution will say, well, we'll just take the max every year. And Tyson, our assistant city manager, do you know, I had you look up a few things. I can't remember if we talked about this one.
Yeah,
We've gone through truth and taxation when recently in Bountiful and for
yeah.
how much?
So we've done it 3 times in the past 26 years. So 2021, 2018, and 2000. And those increases were 36% in 2021, 13% in 2018, and 12% in 2000.
So,
Can I ask a devil's advocate question? I mean, it's not even devil's advocate.
Absolutely.
But it's just kind of a thought. So one of the things that I wonder about truth in taxation is if the state system has made it very unpleasant to go through it in general, and if it's made it so unpleasant that it gets put off so long that A, needed services may be significantly degraded by the time we get around to doing it, and B, that when it does happen, that it is a very large amount because it's been put off so long. So you strategically wait until those 3 council members weren't going to run again, and so then they'll vote for it as they walk out the door. I mean, it's just a very difficult thing to do, and I don't know. It's just a question in my head of if, in fact, it would be healthier to say, well, we're going to do it for the amount of inflation every year anyway to hold steady. I don't know which one is better or worse, but I'm not even asking for an answer, really. That's just a question in my head, but.
and maybe I'll share my perspective but these are the folks that have to stand in, and do the
Yes.
vote. But I have seen over my years that, yeah, it is a deterrent because it's fairly inflammatory, especially the advertisement and it's confusing to people that, we advertise a 37% property tax rate increase, but that's
Yep.
37% of, we're 7% of the total tax rate, right? That because we're just a small portion. So that's confusing. And so, yeah, it is a deterrent. However, my personal opinion is that I think you've seen that Bountiful has probably done far less than inflationary amounts over the last 26 years, which has been a benefit to residents.
Yes.
We haven't needed to, and we haven't just done it because it was convenient. So that's not a bad thing.
Yeah. I think even just that 36, 13, and 12 is a pretty telling point to make back to the bill sponsor to say, this is what my city's done over 26 years. What do you hope they do if you pass your bill?
Because what will happen is,
Yeah.
right?
It's pretty clear what will happen. Yeah.
We will be, I'm not speaking for Bountiful specifically, but cities and and taxing entities generally, right? You can see that
Yeah.
for fear of not being able to capture that revenue, they may just take it.
Let me maybe give another perspective because you are a very well-oiled machine, right? And Bountiful as a whole has a really good track record of being accountable, planning for the future. I think it was about 13 years ago or so that West Bountiful, as an example, their council had just not taken the time to have residents pay for upcoming water infrastructure costs. So they had to increase the water bills by 230% for 10 years just to try to catch up to be able to redo the infrastructure for the water. So it wasn't that they were not managing it well, they just didn't include that, right? So I think it's those kinds of issues. Now they're planning for their water infrastructure, but it took one of those incidences for them to go, we haven't been planning for this. And so about 8 years ago, when that definitely came to light, because at the time I was representing West Bountiful, and Representative Ward now does that, the League of Cities and Towns and Wasatch Front Regional Council had started addressing some of those things to start helping cities learn how to better manage their planning. And so I think that's where some of this may come from, is an oops, we forgot to do this. And it may be for other emergency things like Woods Cross with the aquifer drying up and more than 100 homes and streets sinking. has caused a tremendous amount of cost to the city. So there's multiple things. I think when the state tries to look at the whole, sometimes it's one or two or five of those that have had extreme cases, and just trying to find a balance. So I would say as this comes forward, Representative Ward and I are always open for you to look at legislation, give us your recommended changes, instead of just, we don't like it, we don't want, I think it helps if we can be very specific in our response, and I think you're very good at that, in letting us know. But I think it's always helpful to recommend changes rather than just say we don't want it, right? Even though we may not want it. It does help to have suggested changes. So that's a little perspective, but a great compliment to you, right? Of the things that you've done over the years to do a lot of this planning.
Thank you. We do work hard to be a pay-as-you-go city. To Representative Ward's question, having spent a lot of time at the state capitol, I think there's been an effort over the years to take the initial truth in taxation idea and then have add-ons, some pluses to make it really painful. Part of it is make it a percentage instead of the actual dollar amount. Part of it is timing on meetings and things like that. Representative Karen Peterson has a bill to look at some of those clunky elements. I think there's some that we would say are helpful. There's still some we want to continue to have discussions on. I think one of the things that we routinely run into in local government, not just the municipal level, is I don't think anyone who hasn't lived through a truth in taxation hearing from this side of the process understands how the certified rate process works. And so many residents believe we already get inflation as they see their tax bill and their assessments from the county assessor come through, and so they believe that we've already been getting inflation when the opposite is true. We are not, and so that we have an odd process, and then we've compounded it with playing with the pressures of what you guys do and what we sometimes do. You do something in public policy to see if you're going to get a certain reaction, and sometimes you get way more than that reaction. And so both of those things, I think, have played out in my experience. But the certified rate process, nobody understands.
We try to educate and have had some success with that, but it's a challenge. We know you're on the clock, and so we have one other property tax item that we wanted to share, and that has to do with the proposal to change the primary exemption or the exemption for primary property owners from 45% to 60%.
And I oppose that.
The idea behind it, I think, was because they've seen some of the powers that be have seen a shift in the burden to property to a greater percentage of revenues being collected from residents. There's a lot of different reasons for that. The primary one is we've just seen a big proliferation in the number of residential units in the state. But Tyson did a little bit of research to just give you some idea of the impact that the intent of it is to be revenue neutral, so that if the rate, the amount of money that's being paid by primary property owners goes down, then it would be picked up by everybody else, which are primarily business and secondary homeowners. And Tyson did a little bit of research on what that might look like for us.
Yeah,
An idea.
it's interesting in Bountiful, we have so many residential homes in Bountiful, very limited commercial property and business type. So in Bountiful, excuse me, 85% of our property tax comes from the primary residential homes. So putting that into dollar amounts, 3.6 million of our 4.1 million comes from the primary residential homes. So if this bill were to pass and it were to shift to giving a 60% exemption, that would require that 1 million of our property tax be shifted from those primary residential homes to our commercial sector. And as I mentioned, it's just so small that would put a huge burden in reallocating those property tax dollars.
So if you had a short way, maybe even just say that in an email or even a bar graph, I think would get it across really well, so that we had a visual way to go back and say, look, this sounds pretty good. to you up here, but different cities in different situations, it will come across very differently. For myself, I have another reason why I oppose it, and I oppose it because I wish for there to be more housing. And my feeling is that that you all respond in a very sensible way when you say, well, look, another residence doesn't pay enough tax money to pull its weight. I've got to have businesses come because that's the only way I'm going to be able to meet my needs. And that's a sensible way for you to respond. But my feeling is that we created that disincentive for housing in a desire for business by making this discount, and that we'd exacerbate it further by saying residences pay even less. So that's my other reason. But.
And I would say a different conversation that I've heard is that, you know, when COVID hit, more people were buying second, third homes. And so, but they're not claiming it as such. And so I think one of the conversations was looking at having primary residence be more of a benefit for people who are actually living here, and those that are using Utah homes as a second or third option, or vacation homes, that they actually pay a higher tax than those with residential primary homes. Let me maybe mention a couple of things just for time's sake. When you look at the cost of living, Representative Ward mentioned a couple of things, but the PIDs, the Planned Investment Districts, are basically glorified HOA, which is where a developer can go in, have this piece of property, develop it, and then put the cost of the development to the users for the next 30 or 40 years instead of addressing it and finalizing the cost, right? And so it's really a glorified HOA for decades that exponentially makes just those sections pay for that, even though they are all still paying city and county taxes. Bountiful is not so much of an issue with HOAs, but I do represent North Salt Lake, which has so many HOAs. They are not experts, the homeowners are not experts in slurry seals, nor do they have the muscle if one is done and it's not done well to have them come back and fix it. And so, but so many developers now are putting more homes into a tighter space, and then making the residents pay HOAs to pay for more of the infrastructure, where it really should, in my opinion, that those two in itself are major issues why the cost of living goes up so much for individuals trying to buy a home. And I think our cities would benefit the residents so much if some of those HOAs could be incorporated back into cities. Even if they have smaller, more narrow streets, buses still get through there. If they can plow it, cities can. I mean, I think there's other things. But as I look and having six married kids that are in their 20s and early 30s who are all looking at this cost of living, it's all these extra home fees and HOA fees that developers are doing now for the sake of being able to put more homes in, that it's a lot for the cost of living, that I think we really need to look at and figure out a better way to address it, because homeowners are not experts in road maintenance, for one. A second thing I wanted to mention is throughout all appropriations, throughout all government agencies right now, because, as Representative Ward mentioned, that our funding is pretty stagnant. For quite some time, we had great federal funds coming in from COVID funds with ARPA funds, right? And that is dried up, that is gone. So we're pretty stagnant right now, but we did this to an extent with higher ed and asking them to look at 10% of their administrative costs, see how they can shuffle, and actually have it more go to the students. This year, the appropriation committees are asking all of the agencies to find 5% somewhere to cut. And initially, they went to all the agencies saying, find something you don't like and cut it. And I was over here going, but you also need to be able to tell them if they want to plan and invest a one-time cost for improving their IT, or the consumer putting in their own information instead of their staff, they could actually save 5% by being more efficient. And I think that's a lot of, they, for some reason, weren't thinking that way. So hopefully now that's on the table to our government agencies is if you're looking to save 5%, it could be in cutting, or it could be in just finding more ways to be more innovative and efficient with what you do have, that sometimes we're just used to doing things the way we have been. One example of that is vital records. They are about 8 years behind just putting in marriage licenses. And somebody is hand inputting the marriage license at the state level instead of just having a streamlined process that comes from the counties. And I'm like, why are you doing that yourself? The end user should be doing it to begin with and saving all these steps along the way. So that is something that you'll see some agencies kind of crying about, that I've got to cut to 5%. But I think there's many of us as individuals and as families that try to do that ourselves. So it's probably pretty good practice every once in a while to see what we can do to trim some of the edges.
Thank you. And Representative Ward, I want to note that we are at your time limits. We'll understand if you need to scoot.
I'd better, but if you could put that in a short way.
Send it to both of us.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you'll send it to Weiler too. That would be a powerful argument, I think, about that.
Thank you. We'll
Thank
make
you.
sure that you get that.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, well,
Anything
so
else?
any last questions for Representative Ballard now that she's our sole person at the hotspot podium? Any other hot topics that people want to mention and have on her radar for the session?
Go ahead, and then I have a compliment for your city council too.
I just had two quick questions. Well, first of all, congratulations on your GRIT award from Governor
Thank
Cox.
you.
Just curious to know what time your town hall meetings are on the 20th and 24th?
So they just left. I think theirs might be, actually, I don't know. You can look at Representative Ward's
Sure, he'll
Facebook
post
page.
it
The
at some point.
24th on that Saturday morning is 10 to 11:30. But usually we have every Saturday of the session live on South Davis Community Facebook page, which you have to ask to be part of that group, but anybody can. We have live every Saturday morning from about 9 to 10:30, where you can ask questions in the chat and we talk about the hot topics of the week. So that we do that every single time along the way. We also have newsletters that we send out weekly. You can sign up for mine at melissagarfballard.com to sign up for the newsletters, where you get a lot of resources of the things that are going on during the week. So that helps too.
Terrific. And then just one more question, if I may. You mentioned your bill, or one of the overarching goals for your caucus is homelessness. Curious to know if there's a mental health component with that bill, or if it's just strictly from a budgetary standpoint.
So a big perspective about homelessness is there's a lot, I've talked to many people on the state board. We have Representative Clancy, who after the session will immediately be our homeless designated state designee to oversee that. There's a lot of talk, whether it is mental health or other things, that there's an actual accountability. What we don't want is what happened during COVID. Vegas was sending busloads up to Utah saying that homeless individuals, Utah will take care of you, and they would just give them a one-way ticket. We don't want a bus stop. So how do we, with 50% of our current homeless individuals being not from Utah, how do we address that? How do we address it within our counties, our city? And I don't think the whole should all go to Salt Lake. If we have homeless throughout many parts of the state, I think our counties should be more helpful in that, instead of just busing them all to Salt Lake. But the accountability side of it, there's a lot of talk about civil commitment, involuntary civil commitment, where they really are able to detox, have 90 days to have some of those treatments, but also a follow-up after that when they are released of again, accountability, that if you're wanting our services, these are the things that we expect from you. Right now, there's not a whole lot of that. They treat and then they release, and I think there's statewide a lot more desires to have kind of a combination of a requirement of employment if they're mentally, physically able to, treatment and counseling, any medical requirements, and working with their caseworker or their parole officer, and then, of course, that housing component. If the rest of those, if there's some kind of accountability, it's not, we like to help individuals to raise their a capacity rather than being more reliant upon the state. And I think that accountability factor has not driven our policy, and I think you'll see that moving forward. It's going to take some time. It may or may not be in some of this session, but I think it's where the state, the conversations that I've heard, and those that are working on the homeless factor are really working on. So that's a really important question.
Thank you. We probably have time for just one last question for Representative Ballard, if anyone has one.
I have one more compliment then for your
Okay.
city council, and in talking about your efficiency and the work that you do. When we were in the thick of COVID, we were also talking about water accountability, about having secondary metering. And your council at the time was very good about reaching out to us to say what the state is requiring is something that our residents cannot afford, that we cannot afford. We voted those, we were very influential in helping to vote those down, but then what we were able to do is take some of those federal ARPA funds to help compensate for Bountiful being one of those, if I'm correct, being one of those cities that got help to get some of that secondary metering. If I'm right, that's what I remember the circumstance being, and I just wanted to say that's really from having a responsive and astute city council working with us, trying to help work within the system a lot better.
Thank you. I do recall those conversations, and I think the monies ended up flowing to our special service district friends, Bountiful Irrigation and South Davis Water and Dual Creek, but we were happy to be part of making sure that that could be funded. So we wish you just the most health and energy, and as you go forward with the next 45 days and the sprint that the session is, and we will be in touch, and if you have questions for us, please also be in touch with us.
Thank you so much for having both of us.
Thank you. And we will just take a short break between our work session and our council meeting that will start at 7 p.m.